Happy New Year, everybody. I really hope it started well for you and your families. I wish you really all the best for this 2018. A lot of health and peace in the world, isn't it? Okay. So let's start. I have a brief announcement to start for you on the report that the Secretary General will launch on Thursday, 11th of January at 10 a.m. New York time. This is a report on migration. The title is Making Migration Work for All. It's a report that provides a vision for how to better manage migration for the benefit of all, the migrants themselves, their host communities, and their societies of origin. The General Assembly requested this report to the Secretary General as an input to the zero draft of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration and related intergovernmental negotiations. Now, the reason for which I'm telling you this now is that Mrs. Louise Arbour, Special Representative of the Secretary General for International Migration, would like to speak to journalists in Europe as much as it will be done in New York on Thursday. So we are organizing an on-the-record press briefing via WebEx tomorrow, 10 January, so that's the New York time. It will be 2:30 p.m. Geneva time, 8:30 New York. So this is a virtual press briefing with Geneva, Brussels, and Vienna. And in Geneva, we are organizing this in room 4. Everything is under strict embargo until Thursday. We'll give you today the report, embargoed report, and we would like to know who would like to attend this briefing. We are going to set up a screen in room 4 and would like to invite you to come and let us know who's coming. Cecile is preparing a note to correspondent right now, so you can answer that invitation directly if you intend to come and cover the briefing. Of course, it's not just the briefing. I mean, she's not just speaking. She will do just a brief introduction, and then you will have the possibility of asking questions in English and French. Marta.
Yes, good morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
In New York would be Mr. Guterres and Mrs. Arbour launching the report.
That I know of is Guterres, Mr. Guterres, is our Secretary General. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I have not been given the time. I can find it for you straight away. The day is definitely Thursday, but the time I have to check. Okay, so that was just the only announcement I have for you today. Otherwise, let's start immediately with Jens on Syria. Do you have any beginning of year question before we go into the, no? Okay. Jens, visit on Mr. Lowcock.
Thank you very much and good morning, everyone. So UN Humanitarian Chief Mark Lowcock has arrived now in Damascus, in Syria, for a 3-day visit to that country, where he is on his first visit in the capacity as USG for Humanitarian Affairs, to see for himself the impact of Syria's conflict on civilians, assess the humanitarian response, and discuss how to improve access and delivery with key stakeholders. As I mentioned, it is his first visit. The last time we had a USG for Humanitarian Affairs visiting Syria was in December 2015. That was the then USG, Stephen O'Brien. So more than 2 years since we've been there at that high level. So in Damascus, Mr. Lowcock is expected to meet government officials, also humanitarian agencies and partners. I understand he's actually meeting the UN country team right now. And other key stakeholders. He will travel to Homs, where he will meet people who have suffered the consequences of this conflict and talk to them firsthand about what they experience and how the humanitarian community can best help. As a reminder, you know that we do have a humanitarian response plan for Syria. it requests $3.5 billion, the highest appeal ever for Syria. And it intends to help 11.2 million people in need out of the estimated 13.1 million people in total who are in need of assistance. That was it I had on that one. I will send out the note also with the media contact people in the field who can be contacted during this mission. Thank you.
Questions on the visit of Mr. Lowcock to Syria? I can't see any. And since William is coming, we also have something about the Syrian refugees, as soon as he can get it on the podium. No other questions for Jens? No? Yes? Yes, go ahead.
I was a bit late, but have you got anything on Idlib? Idlib, anything to say about that?
Yeah, what I can say on Idlib is that we continue to be deeply concerned for the safety and protection of tens of thousands of people in southern Idlib and rural Hama in northeastern Syria, where ongoing hostilities have already caused deaths and injuries of civilians. Tens of thousands of civilians already in dire circumstances have been recorded as displaced since 1st of December due to the fighting. The majority of those displaced have moved to northwestern Idlib and the Mart al-Numan sub-district in southern Idlib. We estimate that there are a total of 2 million people in Idlib governorate, about half of whom are already internally displaced before the recent escalation in violence. Now, with the onset of winter, a top priority is safe shelter, as many families are fleeing into areas that are already at full capacity and into communities where resources have been depleted. So we are, of course, trying our best to respond to the immediate needs of those who need assistance, but security remain an issue for us.
And maybe I'll let William also add some information on the humanitarian side on Syria.
Okay, yeah, this is actually about Syrian refugees in Lebanon. According to a recent study that we conducted together with UNICEF and WFP, the situation of Syrian refugees in Lebanon is more precarious than ever. This is the seventh winter that many of them are spending in makeshift shelters and in informal settlements in Lebanon. They are more vulnerable than ever, according to this survey. More than half are now living in extreme poverty, and over 3/4 are living below the official poverty line. 7 years into the crisis, Syrian refugees in Lebanon are finding it even more difficult to make ends meet and are more reliant than ever on international aid amid an uncertain outlook for humanitarian funding in 2018. The annual vulnerability assessment of Syrian refugees, which, as I said, was conducted by UNHCR, UNICEF, and WFP, reveals that 58% of households are now living in extreme poverty, on less than $2.87 per person per day. This is some 5% more than a year ago. And the number of households living below the overall poverty line has also continued to rise. 76% of refugee households are living below this level. This means over 3/4 of Syrian refugees in Lebanon now live on less than $4 per day, leaving refugees with dwindling resources to meet their most basic needs. Borrowing money for food to cover health expenses and pay rent continues to be extremely common, with almost 9 out of every 10 refugees saying they are in debt. This underlines the vulnerabilities facing most Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Food insecurity also remains critically high, affecting 91% of households to some degree. But vulnerabilities are also growing elsewhere. Obtaining legal residency continues to be a challenge, leaving refugees exposed to an increased risk of arrest, hindering their ability to register their marriages and making it more difficult for them to find daily labor, send their children to school, or access health care. Taken as a whole, the survey results paint an alarming picture of the growing vulnerabilities facing Syrian refugees in Lebanon. 7 years into the crisis, they are more reliant than ever on humanitarian aid, with more than 2/3 saying they had relied on some form of assistance in the previous 3 months. Self-reliance opportunities are extremely limited in an economy deeply affected by the neighboring conflict in Syria. And external funding is insufficient to keep up with the growing needs. In 2017, only 36% of the total funding needed to provide adequate humanitarian support in Lebanon was received as of the beginning of December. There is more information and more details in the briefing note that my colleague is handing now, and you'll be able to find the survey on our website.
Thank you, William. Was that a hand that you raised before? Yeah, no, but I saw yours, but Jamie put up and then down the head, but now his head down. So you go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi. That's funny. William, what about, you didn't talk about any of these so-called coping mechanisms, that is, if they are famished or starving and they're not able to pay their rent and so forth. What kind of an impact does this have upon the children in particular? Because there have been reports throughout about child labor. Has this worsened? What sort of exploitation or trafficking or so forth is going on, forced marriage? If you could talk a bit about that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, indeed. The precarious situation that many of these refugees are facing is pushing them to adopt negative coping mechanisms, such as early marriage and child labor. Many families can't afford to make ends meet without the support of their wages earned by children. Also, early marriages are a recurrent problem. I don't have the actual figures here with me, but I think there is more information on the report. I can try to get that to you, Lisa.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. These early marriages, do they tend to be abusive? I mean, what happens? Do the parents get paid a certain amount of money in order for it to occur? And then what sort of work, you talk about labor, but what kind of labor? Are they hazardous? Yeah.
I mean, early marriages are not necessarily abusive, but they are always of concern, especially we're talking about children. And many of the Syrian girls are getting married at an early, very early age, sometimes as young as 14 and even younger. So this is always a source of concern. The fact that families are in a vulnerable situation and they are in many ways forced to enter in this type of marriages, it's also a source of concern. What was the other question, Lisa?
It had to do with if you would describe the kind of labor that children engage in, whether it is hazardous, exploitative, sort of be a bit more descriptive about what is happening to them.
Yes, I mean, I'll just give you an example. I was recently in southern Lebanon in December, and I saw you know, I visited some of the settlements in near Tyre, and there people were living in shacks that they built themselves with corrugated iron, with tarpaulins, with bits of plastic, whatever they could get. And in this particular settlement that I visited, many of the children were collecting herbs that were grown in the fields locally to sell in the city. So that's the kind of informal jobs that many of these children do. Not just children, adults as well. But one thing that is particularly worrying is the fact that some employers prefer to hire children because they pay them lower wages than adults. So that's a particular concern.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Hi, William. 36%, is that pretty much on a par with previous years, or are we essentially looking at a case of extreme kind of donor fatigue with the whole Syrian refugee issue?
I would have to check, but my impression is that, yes, that the overall funding has, maybe Jens has something on that, the overall funding has not kept up with the needs. So although the overall or the absolute levels of funding have increased, proportionally they have not kept up with the needs. So we're getting more money, but that money is not proportionally sufficient to carry out the work that we need to do.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, just perhaps for comparison, the overall funding level for all appeals 2017 is now at 57.7%. So that's the overall average funding of the appeals.
Thank you very much. So you have another item on Israel?
Yes, this is to do with Israel's policy to send Sudanese and Eritreans to sub-Saharan Africa or face detention in Israel. We are again appealing to Israel to hold its policy of relocating Eritreans and Sudanese to sub-Saharan Africa. This is after some 80 cases were identified in which people relocated by Israel risked their lives by taking dangerous onward journeys to Europe via Libya. All 80 cases involved Eritrean refugees or asylum seekers who were interviewed by UNHCR staff in Rome. Feeling they had no other choice, they traveled many hundreds of kilometers through conflict zones in South Sudan, and Libya after being relocated by Israel. Along the way, they suffered abuse, torture, and extortion before risking their lives once again by crossing the Mediterranean to Italy. The interviews, all with adult males, some with family members still in Israel, took place between November 2015 and December 2017 in reception centers and informal settlements in the Rome area. All had entered Israel via the Sinai. In every case, they reported torture, mistreatment, and extortion before reaching Israel. Most said they had been transferred from Israel to a country in Africa and provided with a lump sum of $3,500. However, the situation on arrival was different to what most had expected, and with little further support provided beyond accommodation on the first night. They reported feeling unsafe as they were known to have money. Some said that people traveling with them had died en route to Libya, where many experienced extortion and detention, as well as being subjected to abuse, including torture and violence. Including in light of this, UNHCR is seriously concerned over Israel's plans announced on January the 1st to forcibly relocate Eritreans and Sudanese to countries in Africa or have them face indefinite detention. Official statements that the plans may eventually target families and those with pending asylum claims, or that asylum seekers might be taken to the airport in handcuffs, are particularly alarming. At a time when UNHCR and partners in the international community are engaged in emergency evacuations from Libya, forced relocation to countries that do not offer effective protection and the onward movement of these people to Libya and Europe is particularly worrisome. There are some 27,000 Eritreans and 7,700 Sudanese in Israel. Since Israel took over refugee status determination from UNHCR in 2009, only 10 Eritreans and 1 Sudanese have been recognized as refugees. Another 200 Sudanese, all from Darfur, were granted humanitarian status in Israel, and there was an announcement that another 300 will follow. Israel has not received any Eritreans or Sudanese since May 2016. We stand ready to work with Israel to find alternative solutions for the protection needs of asylum seekers, in line with international standards. This includes resettlement out of Israel, as has happened previously.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, John?
My question is to the earlier item by Jens on Syria.
Just 1 second. I think Lisa has a question on this story, on Israel. Go ahead.
A couple of things. Is Israel not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention? And then a follow-up.
Yes, they are.
So then you would say that they are in violation of this Refugee Convention?
Well, you would need to do a full legal analysis of the situation, because some of the people who have turned up in Italy after being relocated to African countries were taking part in what was it has been until now, voluntary, in quotation marks, policy. So we would really need to look case by case on this situation. The announcement of the new policy being forced is more worrying in that sense. But again, we would need to examine things case by case. They are not being sent to the country of origin, so that's another element that to be taken into account. They are being sent to third countries.
Ben?
Well, I'm sorry, I'd have a follow-up on that question there. These countries to which they're being sent, I mean, first of all, how many have been sent, forcibly, I assume? And have you had any follow-up on these refugees when they've arrived in these countries? What has happened to them?
Well, we have tried. The problem is that this policy has been implemented in a very, not in a very transparent manner. Officially, this policy has not been confirmed. Many of the countries that have been named in media reports have denied that they are part of this program. So it's very difficult for us, because officially we are not able to follow up on returns. We have tried to do that, and what is important and what is new is that now those people who have turned up in Italy, we have been able to interview them and get a full picture of the kind of long, dangerous journeys that they have taken, in some cases, all the way to Israel, facing many dangers, torture in the Sinai, and so on. And after spending, in some cases, some years in Israel, now being sent back to Africa, where after finding that they can't stay there, they move onwards to other African countries, or in many cases, as in this, 80 Eritreans, all the way to Italy. I mean, at the moment, as you know, we are trying to deal with the protection needs of Eritreans and other refugees in Libya, where they are facing considerable abuse and a very harsh situation. So this is not really, being a very coherent policy when one state sends people back to a situation where they are not receiving or not finding the protection that they need, and they need to move on and risk their lives again. Thank you very much. I have Ben, Lionel, then John has a question for Jens, and then we'll go to the next subject. Please, brief answers. Ben.
William, there's just a couple of things I want to go over. You raised concerns about the transparency of the policy. As I understand it, it was approved by Cabinet in November. UNHCR was aware of that, and it was officially announced as being implemented last week by the Prime Minister. So I don't know where the transparency issue is there. Secondly, you said you're unclear about which countries are participating. As I understand it, Uganda and Rwanda have publicly announced that they're participating. Third, just more broadly, in a context where we're talking about Libyan slave markets and situations for migrants which are simply unimaginable, does UNHCR have a position on Israel saying we're going to give you $3,500 in a plane ticket, in contrast to some of the other plights that migrants are finding themselves in? Thanks.
Yes, I mean, the policy has been announced and has been, in fact, in place for a long time now, I think since 2016, but it was not a forced policy at that point. When I was referring to lack of transparency is in the sense that countries, I mean, just a couple of days ago, Rwanda denied that they were part of this, or a Rwandan official denied that they were part of this program. So you really need to look into what is being implemented here. From our point of view, we feel that Israel should be trying to find solutions for this population, which is quite sizable, and that in Europe, at least in the case of Eritreans, has a very high recognition rate. So we would expect among them, many of them would qualify for refugee status. So what we would like to see in Israel is more, and we are willing to help in that respect, is to find legal alternatives for these people through resettlement in other countries.
Lionel?
I had a similar question as Ben, but just to follow up on what you just said. You mean Israel doesn't have to fulfill its obligation under the 51 Convention? Israel has to give asylum to these people. That's all. There's no way of talking about relocation to Europe because there is a good acceptation rate in Europe. This is the obligation of Israel to accept on its territory these people and to give them protection. That's all, no? What are you saying?
Yes, the problem is that so far very few people have obtained protection. As I said, only 10 Eritreans and 1 Sudanese have been recognized as refugees in Israel. So yes, I mean that is clearly a problem.
So this is what needs to be changed, right?
You said so.
Yes, this is one of the things that need to be changed. Yes.
The only one. This is the only
not necessarily the only one. I mean, you know, we can look into. I mean, in the past, refugees were resettled out of Israel to other countries, and we think that could be also an option for many of them because prospects for integration in Israel might be difficult for some people of certain profiles. So you really need to look into case by case. Obviously, we would like Israel to provide protection to people who need it, but we are also willing to work in exploring other options.
And then my question was yes, you can. My question was about the countries part of the program. As Ben, I read about Rwanda and Uganda, but just to follow up. Regarding the 80 people who arrived in Italy and were interviewed by your staff, where were they, turned back by Israel? Which country? Because you have this information.
I think in most cases, if not all of them, they mentioned Rwanda as the country where they had been taken to.
Okay, thank you very much, William. John, ask your question to Jens.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and then we go to the next.
Jens, Mr. Lowcock, are there any plans for him to visit Eastern Ghouta, and are there any prospects of, during his visit there, getting more medical evacuees from Eastern Ghouta? Only a fraction were evacuated last week.
To answer both questions at the same time, there's no plan for him to go to Eastern Ghouta. There is a plan for him to go to Homs in the course of his mission.
I'm sorry, what about the second part? Anything in the pipeline while he's present?
Well, you said if you were able to do something, taking things into Eastern Ghouta or bringing anybody out of Eastern Ghouta, but he's not going to Eastern Ghouta.
I understand, but while he's there, are there any plans for the Syrians to give the green light for more evacuees as a goodwill gesture or something?
While he is there, he will interact with government officials and other partners, and of course he will push these issues as hard as he can with any interlocutors, so that we look at people who are in besieged areas, who are in hard-to-reach areas, and so on and so forth, so that they get the aid that they need and the evacuations that are necessary.
Okay, Marixi, can we go to Myanmar?
Good morning. So I spent December 6 through January 3 in Myanmar. almost half of that time in Rakhine State. I traveled to the northern part of the state where the violence broke out last August, driving 655,000 people, the vast majority of them Rohingya, across the border into Bangladesh. I also went into central Rakhine, where about 120,000 Rohingya have been stranded in squalid camps since 2012, and about 200,000 more live in villages where their freedom of movement and access to basic services are also increasingly restricted. UNICEF and our partners still don't know what the true picture is of the children who remain in northern Rakhine because we don't have enough access. What we do know is troubling. Prior to August 25, we were treating 4,800 children suffering from severe acute malnutrition. These children are no longer receiving this life-saving treatment. All 12 of the outpatient therapeutic nutrition centers run by our partners are closed because they were either looted, destroyed, or the staff can't get to them. None of the 5 primary health centers that we were supporting are functioning, and there's nowhere near enough clean water or food aid being distributed. Partners have identified about 20 children separated from their parents during the violence, but they estimate that the total number to be at least 100, most of whom are in parts of northern Rakhine that they still cannot access. Mulongo town clearly bears the scars of the recent violence. Large areas have been razed and flattened by bulldozers. Most stores are shuttered, few people are on the streets, very few women, and even fewer children. Our best estimates, and these are our best estimates, indicate that only about 60,000 Rohingya remain in Mulongo township out of a pre-August 25 population of about 440,000. The Rohingya children who do remain in rural areas are almost totally isolated. We hear of high levels of toxic fear in children, both from Rohingya and Rakhine communities. UNICEF stands ready to work with the government of Myanmar and with the state government of Rakhine to reach out to all children, irrespective of their ethnicity, religion, status, or circumstance, to bring them the protection and assistance they need. For this, we urgently need regular and unlimited access across Rakhine State. While the eyes of the world are on the situation in northern Rakhine and in Cox's Bazar, over 60,000 Rohingya children remain almost forgotten, trapped in 23 camps in central Rakhine that they were driven into by violence in 2012. Pre-existing restrictions on the movement of people into and out of the camps were tightened, first after the October 26 outbreak of violence, and again after August 2017, making it even harder for humanitarian workers to deliver aid to children and making already poor conditions in the camp even worse. The worst camps are in appalling condition. Nget Chong 1 and 2 in Pokto Township are only reachable by boat, a 4 to 5 hour ride on the local boats that are used to deliver supplies. The 2 camps are below sea level. There's almost no tree cover. The first thing that you notice when you reach the camps is the stomach-churning stench. Parts of the camp are literally cesspools. The shelters teeter on stilts above garbage and excrement. In one camp, the pond where people draw water from is separated by a low mud wall from the sewage. You can easily see how a little bit of rainfall would wash that filth over into the pond. Children walk barefoot through this muck. One camp manager reported 4 deaths among children ages 3 to 10 within the first 18 days of December. His only ask was for proper pathways so they wouldn't have to walk through their own waste. The restrictions also mean it is extremely difficult for Rohingya to leave their camps for medical treatment. Permission to travel to seek medical assistance is only granted where there is a justification certified by a doctor. Checkpoints and curfews mean delays. The travel authorization costs money, which most people in the camps can't afford. Relatives are often not permitted to accompany the patient. Once at the hospital, the Rohingya are confined to a restricted area and not allowed outside contact. As a result, people are turning to traditional healers, untrained physicians, or self-medicating. One UNICEF-supported caseworker told me that his daughter had committed suicide because she couldn't bear a pain in her abdomen that the camp health services could not treat. Basic living conditions and access to life-saving services need to be improved urgently. There's an acute level of fear between the Rakhine and the Rohingya communities. I was told by parents in one Rohingya village that they hadn't had their children vaccinated against Japanese encephalitis because the government vaccinators were accompanied by security officers. And I was told by government health workers that they dared not go to Rohingya communities without security. The movement restrictions are shrinking horizons for children in the camps, nowhere more so than in terms of education. Most of the learning takes place in poorly resourced temporary learning classrooms with determined volunteer teachers who have little formal training. There are nowhere near enough classrooms to accommodate students, and there is only one high school in the capital, Sitwe, where most camps are located, that caters to Rohingya students between the 10th and 12th grades. Before, the more fortunate students from other camps would come to Sitwe for high school. This year, however, one teacher told me that because of the movement restrictions, no student would make it out of the more remote camps. I met a 17-year-old high school graduate in a Sitwe camp whose only chance of going to university is through distance learning, with an institution that is less than a dozen kilometers from where he lives. No Muslim has been able to attend universities in Rakhine State since 2012. What's the point of learning, one mother asked me. Rohingya children desperately need education if they are to have any kind of prospects for a better future. Temporary solutions need to be improved immediately, and more durable arrangements providing children with access to formal education provided by properly trained teachers and recognized by the education system must be set in place quickly. Otherwise, this generation's future prospects will be permanently damaged. The government of Myanmar has established a ministerial committee tasked with implementing the recommendations of the final report of the Rakhine Advisory Commission chaired by Kofi Annan, which include addressing the stateless status of the Rohingya population and meeting priority needs. Rohingya children need a political solution to the issue of legal identity and citizenship. In the interim, they need to be recognized first and foremost as children. The Convention on the Rights of the Child guarantees rights to health, education, and opportunities to learn and grow to all children, irrespective of their ethnicity or status or the circumstances in which they find themselves. Ways and means must be found to deliver these rights to Rohingya children in Rakhine State today. Ethnic Rakhine children have also been deeply affected by years of communal violence and division. We have long worked to promote more equitable and inclusive access for all children across Rakhine and Myanmar, and we stand by our principle that a child is a child and every child in need deserves help. The Annan Commission has provided a roadmap for a durable political solution so that all children's rights can be protected in a sustainable, open, and fair manner in the longer term. UNICEF stands ready to support this crucial work, and we call on the global community, especially regional organizations and countries, to leverage their influence so children have better lives today and a future they can look forward to.
Thank you, Mariksi. Jens?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to add a few details on the humanitarian response plan that we do have for Myanmar, which are designed to address some of these issues that UNICEF has raised now. The humanitarian response plan for Myanmar 2018 asks for $183 million US. Now, the breakdown of where we intend to spend that money is the following. More than 2/3 of that is intended for Rakhine State. That's $132 million to help some 660,000 people in need in Rakhine State. Second, 42 million people $42 million for the Kachin state, and finally $9 million for Shan state. So the vast majority in Rakhine state. In terms of what kind of aid is included in this appeal, the top three categories or sectors are first food security on the top, then it's wash, water, sanitation, health services, and thirdly, protection. Those are the top three. As it's very early in the year, not a lot of funding has come in against that appeal. We have about $9 million now, which has come in, and I just want to mention, because hopefully that can encourage other donors to come on board. I want to mention United Kingdom, government of Germany, the government of Switzerland have all given initial funding to this appeal. Thank you.
And Christian, you have some figures on the health situation.
Yeah, good morning and Happy New Year, by the way. Yes, to add a few figures, it is estimated that there are around 58,700, so close to 60,000 pregnant women in the Rohingya population living in the camps. While approximately close to 16,000 deliveries are expected to occur over the next 3 months, approximately 67% of the pregnant women, so 2/3 of the pregnant women, have no or very limited access to gynecological or obstetrical care services. Also, to chip in the latest diphtheria figures, as of 7 January, we have 3,649 clinically suspected cases with a total death of 30. The last death reported on 2 January, so that has a case fatality rate of approximately 1%. Nearly 350,000 children between 6 weeks and 15 years were given diphtheria containing vaccines. Now, the health sector continues to work toward expanding its reach and services among the Rohingya settlements and camps. Most recently, the government has decided to establish 20 health centers in the camps in prefabricated structures, so a bit more semi-permanent at least. This will help expand the access to basic health services. So all health sector partners are working with the government to meet the health needs of the population. The challenges in terms of numbers, the terrain, and the resources are many and huge, as you just heard, of course, from our colleagues. The health sector is grossly underfunded. WHO and other health sector partners need $175 million in the next 12 months to scale up the response. WHO is appealing to the donors to fund more the health needs of these populations.
And finally, the figures on foods.
Yes, the World Food Programme has been providing food for 150,000 people in Rakhine State since November. Most of those in central Rakhine, at least 33,000 people in northern Rakhine out of the 150,000, and we're going to do that again this month in January. We're working with the local partners on the ground, with local NGOs, with government authorities to distribute the food. We're coordinating closely with the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, so that we don't overlap. And as Marixie said, it's still hard for us to have a comprehensive picture of all the needs. Everybody needs more access, and we are obviously extremely concerned about the food insecurity and the undernutrition in Rakhine State, which already was bad before the outbreak of the violence. That's a quick update from us, and I think from the funding figure, we need some $25 million for the next 6 months to help the people affected by the conflict throughout the country. And grateful for all the donors that are helping us.
Thank you very much, Bettina. And just to clarify that Christian's figures refer to Cox's Bazar, not to Rakhine State. Okay, questions? Yes, John.
Yes, good morning, Marixie. Did you get access to the northern Rakhine, the full area? And secondly, the camps and the conditions that you mentioned, they're administered by government officials, or they administered by NGO and partners or UN agencies? Who is administering these camps? Thank you.
So I was able to get to Mongdo town in Mongdo township in northern Rakhine State. There are 3 townships in northern Rakhine State. I was only able to access the town in Mongdo town in northern Rakhine. I had more access in central Rakhine and was able to visit camps over there. The camps are administered by, I forget what the acronym is, but it's, they are run by members from the community, but they are set up with, together with the government. So the people running them are from the community, but are, it's set up with the government.
Other questions? No, thank you very much. Thank you, Marixie.
Also, just we'll be sending out the briefing note in a couple of minutes, and there's a link there which has pictures from camps in Central Rakhine, which a lot of you I know have not been able to get to. So we'll send that out shortly. Thank you.
You said you took the picture.
We got those pictures while I was there. Okay. Actually, while I was there, and then through a previous trip in October, so a couple months ago also.
Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you. Christian, next item, Zambia. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues.
Pardon me. Yes, a current cholera outbreak in Zambia is centered around Lusaka, the country's capital, and shows no signs of slowing down. The government declared the outbreak on 6 October after 2 suspected cases reported to a clinic on 4 October. After an initial downward trend, then the cholera cases started intensifying again in early November, and health authorities reached out to WHO for more support, including helping with a request for 2 million doses of oral cholera vaccine from the global stockpile. WHO helped the government put together the plan for this and trained about 500 health and community workers in how to administer the vaccine. The request was submitted on 14 December and approved on 15 December. The vaccines have arrived in 3 batches on 7, 8, and 9 January, so should fully arrive then today. And the campaign is supposed to start tomorrow on 10 January. WHO also procured 2 large tents, each with a 30-bed capacity to expand the cholera treatment services. Since the outbreak began on 8 January, in Lusaka district alone, 2,523 cases and 26 related deaths have been recorded. That's 8 of 8 January official figures I have. I've seen in the news this morning that the health minister reported slightly upscaled figures from as of this morning, but again, I don't have them certified, but he reported as of this morning 2,802 cases of cholera in Zambia. That's it.
John.
Christian, the outbreak, these figures 2802, since the outbreak began when? This is the cumulative total to date?
Correct. As usual, this is the cumulative from as of 4 October, when the first 2 cases were reported. But let me also use this opportunity to point out again that of course, as in any cholera situation, the clean water, proper sanitation, and the good hygiene are fundamental to controlling and preventing the cholera. So the vaccine is only an additional tool.
Peter.
Yeah, Christian.
Sorry.
I'd like to ask you, what areas of Zambia is the cholera outbreak? I know it was in Lusaka in the central area and in the Copperbelt. Are there any other parts of Zambia where the epidemic has spread?
The only information I have is that almost all cases are in the capital city of Lusaka. I don't have any further information about where the others are. Sorry. I could get back to you. Try to get back to you on that.
Lisa.
Yeah, how many people do you intend to, do you hope to vaccinate during this campaign? How long is this going to go on? Are they mainly children, or is it the whole population? And then, is this a fast-moving epidemic? I mean, are you really concerned about this?
Excuse me, some leftover from the holidays. So Zambia wanted to do 2 rounds of vaccination. That would mean 1 million people would be vaccinated with 2 rounds. This is for the whole population. I would assume, although we haven't received details on it, that most of this would be used in and around the capital of Lusaka. Now, to your question of are we concerned? Well, and as in any cholera situation, first of all, reestablishing the hygiene and the water situation is important, and of course, for the people, a quick access to treatment centers, because as you know, cholera could be a fast killer. If it reaches an elderly or weak people, it could reach in the morning and you could be dead by the evening if you're severely dehydrated, as cholera does. So quick access or easy access to treatment centers and to facilities is key.
So what are you doing about helping people with the hygiene? I mean, do you have information campaigns going on at the same time?
There are all types of campaigns going on. The government has, first of all, deployed the military to clean up parts of the city where sanitation has been poor, has also closed a market where sanitation was poor, has banned street vending and also public gatherings, and was delaying the start of the new school semester. Markets and public gathering places are, of course, known to facilitate transmission. So that's an important step. But WHO is also supporting the government's efforts to improve sanitation and other fundamentals, and we believe it's better to focus on that instead of banning some key public activities. And we're also discussing with the officials to the possibility of reopening the schools as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. No more questions, so can you go to your second item, DRC?
And we stay with cholera, this time to the Democratic Republic of Congo. So the heavy rains from last week all the way until Sunday have triggered flooding and landslides in and around the city of Kinshasa. This has led alone to 45 deaths, more than 5,000 homes have been flooded, and more than 190 houses have collapsed according to a rapid assessment by the Congolese Red Cross. The flooding is now likely to worsen the ongoing cholera epidemic and other waterborne diseases. One health facility which provides cholera treatment has been flooded in the Pakadjuma area. WHO and partners are currently making a rapid risk assessment on the situation and the further public health needs. So the current cholera outbreak in the DRC began in July 2017 and is one of the most severe outbreaks of the diseases in years. In 2017, there was a total of 55,000 cases and nearly 1,200 deaths, which is almost double the number of cases reported for 2016. 24 out of 26 provinces in the DRC have reported cases so far. The case fatality rate in general is at just slightly over 2%, but in some provinces it is much higher. In 4 provinces, the case fatality rate is more than 5% and actually much larger sometimes. Kinshasa is more than 13%, Kasai more than 14%, Tanganyika just slightly over 11%, and Ituri 5.6%. So we believe this is mainly due to lack of timely access to cholera treatment. And of course, it remains that the poor access to safe water is the biggest challenge here. So the response to the cholera outbreak is complicated further by the ongoing humanitarian crisis in the DRC. There are about 4.5 million internally displaced people as of the end of December 2017. the largest IDP population in any single country in Africa. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
And before I give you the floor to question, I just wanted to remind you that today, Under Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, will brief the Security Council on recent developments in the DRC, followed by consultation. John?
Is that a public briefing or closed-door session?
I understand that the briefing part, at least the initial part, is open, but then it will be followed by closed consultations, also in relation with the possible press statement that had been presented yesterday by France. So there are consultations and discussions that will take place afterwards. If you want to be sure, I can get back to you, but I think that's the case. Lisa?
A question, has there been any cholera immunization campaigns going on, or is this a failed prospect given the conflict and how spread out this is? How much of the country actually is affected by this epidemic?
Well, as I mentioned, it's now in 24 out of 26 provinces, so it's nearly all over the country. Let me see, I have nothing about a vaccination campaign. So far, the cholera kits are most important, the treatment for people and the quick access, to get people the quick access, especially in a situation where you have internally displaced people and the humanitarian conflict ongoing.
Is it unusual to have this epidemic lasts so long? I mean, it's gone on since July, you say, and
given the circumstances, with a conflict, with lack of access, with displaced people, including now flooding, this is not unusual, unfortunately. This is a situation which facilitates the spread of cholera and other waterborne diseases very badly. And the conflict, of course, makes any sort of attempt to treat or to help the people worse.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions, so let's go to the last item. Joël? Merci, Christian.
Thanks very much. Just very quickly, we have some numbers. A lot of you have been calling about 2 shipwrecks that occurred over the weekend in the Mediterranean. We want to just say that we're just starting to get our compiling coordinated with missions around the world, so dates aren't quite as fixed as they were earlier, well, late last year. But we understand about 1,000 people have crossed various sea routes into Europe from Africa and the Middle East the first week of January, which is absolutely consistent with what we've seen this time of year, last year and in previous years. What is startling is the number of deaths that occurred just in the first 8 days of the year. We're counting 81 in the Mediterranean, 76 of those in the central route. Now this compares to 11 this time last year, but only 23 in the whole month of December. So we thought we were seeing trends come down considerably in the last few weeks. This is a rather grim week to begin with. Our understanding is 2 major incidents, one reported by Italian authorities in which a rescue ship was able to come very quickly when a craft was floundering. However, they recovered remains of 8 people just in that incident, and witnesses later told our staff in Catania they believed 150 or more people were on the dinghy that was rescued. So given the 86 survivors plus the 8 known corpses, the remainder came to 56 more people, or 64 deaths. We don't know if there'll be more or less, but we do know that some of the victims were children. We also know that 1 3-year-old survivor lost her mother among the deaths or missing. The second incident was either that day or a few hours later the next day, off of the coast of Libya, where 270 migrants were rescued by a Coast Guard unit. They found 2 women, remains of 2 females on the craft. With the cause of death is still unknown. Witnesses later talked about another 10 that were drowned before the rescue took place. The other item we wanted to share with you this morning is we have, as I told you last week, the daily update of returnees from Libya, the charter flights that IOM's been doing. We had another one yesterday, 181 migrants went back to Nigeria. What's important is the total numbers since the AU-EU conference in Abidjan, where there was a commitment to ramp up these return flights from Libya, has risen to 6,577, which is essentially the month of December plus 10 days, because it started last day of November and today is the 9th of January. So we're talking of 40, 41 days. This works out to an average of 160 people a day, which is about the size of a typical IOM charter flight back to a single country. So despite the fact that we've been in holiday season and this is just starting, we're already able to do at least an average of one of these flights a day, some days more than one, and we've got a few more scheduled this week. The New York Times has a big story today on this, on the 7,000 or so Nigerians who have been brought home since IOM started doing this, and encouraging as much press as possible because it's an important development.
Any questions? No, I can't see any. Thank you very much, Joel. Just to clarify, to modify what I said before, the press briefing, the video press briefing with Mrs. Arbor will probably be in room D17, but we are sending out the note with the right information and with the date. I said it was the 11th, but also time of the embargo. If you have, yes, John.
Yes, Joel. When are the applications close for the successor to Mr. Swing, and when will the elections take place? And how many applicants have put in their names already?
I have no information on that at all, but if I get some, I'll let you know.
Clear and concise. No other questions? Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon.